Hello everyone. In this video, I will speak about the main challenges that intentional communities face. What is important to know is that these challenges are not so different from the challenges that any organization faces today. In this video, I will go through the 10 main reasons to why most intentional communities doesn't last longer than a year, and of course give some guidelines in how to avoid these pitfalls. Welcome to this video, which I think might be one of the most important videos that I will make on this channel, because I think these things are so important to know if you're interested both in going to live in an already existing eco-village or intentional community, but especially if you want to start your own one. So after living for 8 years within an eco-community, I have gathered the 10 biggest reasons to why eco-villages and intentional communities fail. Number 1, lacking a higher vision. I've put this as the first one because I really think that this is the most important and often the most underestimated one. But this is really the core of the community. And if you don't have a higher vision in the community, what tends to happen is that when you go through times of crises, or even when you have everyday conflicts that are very surely to arise when you live in a community or an eco-village, because you live with people whom you might not have known before, and you live with them in the everyday life, and so there are many things that clashes. So this kind of conflicts, they do arise. And if you don't have a higher vision that you look towards and that everyone is working towards together, these conflicts may be too burdensome. It may be too difficult to go through. And also crisis is very easy to tear down the whole community instead of strengthen the bond that you have between each other and strengthen the reason why you're doing this together. And so that higher vision in a community can be compared to the love bond that you share within a family. So even though you go through a crisis period with your family members, or if you have those everyday conflicts or nagging irritations that you might feel towards each other, if you wouldn't have that underlying love within the relationship or within the family, at the end you might not feel that it's worth it to stay in that relationship, because the energy that you need to put in order to solve the conflicts or in order to go through a crisis period might not feel that it's worth it, because of course you need to put in a lot of energy. So without that northern star, that higher vision, it's very easy that people will leave and that the community will fail within a very short amount of time. Number 2, unpractical dreamers. And this is a funny one because I actually put myself in the category of unpractical dreamers before I joined the community. So I hope this does not offend anyone. And I really think that everyone can change. But I just want to point out problems that might arise with this kind of characters within your community when you're starting a community. So we have spoken about the importance of having a higher vision, having a dream that everyone is aspiring towards. The problem might arise when you have too many of what I call unpractical dreamers, because anyone who has ever lived in a community knows that it's really hard work to implement everything that you want to do and the visions that you might have, and to make the everyday life work for everyone. So people who might come to the community, even though they have high and big and beautiful dreams for the world, but in a kind of hope to escape everyday life and the reality, and hoping to just get by without really actually doing something, these are characters who create a lot of problems for eco-villages. And something that is difficult and something that is problematic the cat. Hey. Okay, go down. Papa. Go down. Hoppa. Okay, come back. Eco-villages and communities in general tend to attract people who are dreamers, but also drifters, people who are in need of belonging, who are wounded and needy. And I don't say this as something negative, in the sense that I think that everyone in some certain sense in the society is really wounded, because we have a society context where you very easily feel isolated, and where there are things that happen to you and you don't really have the context to emotionally process what has happened to you. And so I think that communities in that sense is really an alternative to a much more individualized society. The problem is that this also takes a lot of time. So when I speak about unpractical dreamers, it's this kind of characters who aren't really willing to do the job to arrive to a certain place, but they are very much still in their heads and with the heads in the clouds. And if you have too many of these kind of characters within a community, the community will not last very long, and it will create a lot of conflicts and drain the community of energy. So you really need to be able to balance between practical work, emotional work, and spiritual work within a community, because otherwise the community will not last very long. Point number 3, conflict over private property and resource management. And here we get really practical, because this is one of the main conflicts that arise within a community if people don't have the same rights or same right of ownership when you start, but also in the long run, if new people come in and don't have the same kind of ownership or the same kind of rights as the previous ones that created the community. And it's very easy to find yourself in a situation where you want to create a community and you have gathered a group of people or a group of friends, and you find a property that people don't have the same kind of economical possibilities. So there's already an imbalance from that point of view within the group. So it's easy that someone perhaps say that, well, I will buy the property and then we will adjust that, or I will buy it because money is just money, and so on. But oftentimes what happens is that power dynamics automatically arise. And so in order to avoid this, it's really important to create a system where everyone has the same kind of rights. So for example, in Damanhur, we have associations owning all our properties within Damanhur, and the people have a part of ownership in those associations. In this way, everyone feels that all the properties in Damanhur are their home as well, and that they have the same kind of rights as everyone else. Or for example, in the new village that we have created here, we have decided to buy the property all together, so splitting in the 9 people that we are, and then each person only owns privately their own house. Well, all the common things like the central house and the terrain is owned by everyone. So of course there are many different solutions in how to solve this problem, but really make sure to get really practical before you start a community, because it's super important that everyone are on the same page. Number 4, economic constraints. Our current society is based in capitalism, and there is so much damage that is done in the name of profit. So it's really understandable that you see money as the main villain in society and the agent that is responsible for all this suffering that we see around us. So what happens often is that people who approach intentional communities or who want to create their own intentional community, they want to be as far away from this system. They really want to cut money out of the picture, and this creates a lot of problem because we are so dependent on that system, and we are so entangled that cutting away from it is not always as easy as we think. So the dangerous path that some communities take is to really cut off completely, but they find themselves owning property, needing to be able to pay taxes, and in the end really needing to have some kind of source of income, because we are living in a society that is based on money as a way of exchange. And so the consequence of this is that oftentimes intentional communities and eco-villages is really places where people live in very poor conditions, and where conflicts arise of who is bringing what, who is contributing with what, and with how much. And also that communities become dependent on outside factors to have a kind of income that could be funds from the government, or it could be in the form of tourism or creating courses and so on. And if you're only dependent on that, your community will probably become very unstable, but it also becomes very much an ideological paradox. So my advice is that instead of trying to fight the current society, you should try to understand how to work with it and use it to your advantage. Because if you have a really great vision for the world and your community is really the solution for the future of humanity, you will need to have a time of passage until you transcend to your ideal. And in that time period, you will need to have to do with the outside society as well. And so your relationship with the outside society and with the economical system and how to create an income for your community is really points that are important to discuss before you create your community. Number 5, and this is connected to the previous points, and that is burnouts. Now, people tend to underestimate all the things that you need to do when you're living in an intentional community, and especially if you want to be self-sufficient. So all the tasks of taking care of the children in the community, growing your own food, taking care of the gardens, making your own food like butter, or transforming food like from the tomatoes to have the tomato sauce, or cutting bale, going on the tractor, taking care of animals, and all these things, they really take a lot of time, if not all the time of communities. And all these everyday tasks that are really time consuming, they also take away time to do things that help with conflict management within the community. So for example, working on relationships, having conscious group processes, and all these kind of things that if you don't have, tend to create a lot of conflicts within the community. So what tend to happen in intentional communities or eco-villages is that this huge workload, together with living with many other people and attending to the needs of all the people that you live with, can create burnouts in people. This is why it's really important as an intentional community to be realistic and not be stuck in the utopian dreams of going back to the lands, because what might happen is that you really just go back in time, and instead of really creating a sustainable alternative for the future of humanity. Number 6, and that is relationships and sexuality. And perhaps this was one of the things that you were thinking about when clicking this video, because very often in media it's portrayed all the conflicts that comes with living with a lot of people, and jealousies that arise, and loose sexual relationships that people are attracted to, but then of course creates all the backlash like jealousy and suffering and so on. And it's important to point out that intentional communities and communes in general became super popular in the 70s and the 60s, where there was also like a sexual liberation movement. And so this is something that people might expect or hope for when they are approaching an eco-village, that it will be much easier to find a partner or to have sexual relationships. And it's important to understand that many people, they actually do flock to intentional communities to have their emotional needs fulfilled. And the capacity of the community to handle these kind of relationships is very often tested by the personalities within the community itself. And so if you don't have clarity around this kind of aspects, then it's very easy that conflicts and jealousies arise. And these kind of conflicts are really the ones that are able to suck the energy out of the community and to shift the focus from the higher vision that we spoke about being so important. Number 7. Poor systems of conflict resolution. And of course, this is connected probably to all the points in this list, because as I've repeatedly said, in an intentional community where people live together, it's impossible to avoid conflict. So it's super important that you create an organization or systems to be able to handle this conflict. So only the fact of how many people you are living in the same place will change the dynamic of the people. So for example, in Damanhur, we see that if you are too few people, the group implode in itself because you don't have any new inputs. But if you're a large group, like 25 people or even larger, it's very difficult to create intimate relationships within that group. And so conflicts arise between different subgroups. And so it's super important that you have systems to help you resolve this kind of conflicts that arise, both small and big ones. And a reason why many communities fail is because they underestimate the importance of having this kind of systems very clear, and having them as a clear tool that everyone can use, both in a group context, but also in a relationship context with only 2 people. So for example, in Damanhur, we have a constitution with norms that we have all written together on how we want to create this life together, which already creates a kind of system that allows us to understand how to interact with each other and with the community itself. But we also have something called the College of Justice, which is a function with people who get voted for, who are the safeguarders of this constitution, and verify that all the different functions in Damanhur are acting accordingly with these rules, or with this set of rules or norms that we have created together. And they can also act as an intermediate between 2 people who have a conflict that they are not able to resolve by themselves. So like a third person that these people can go to get help with resolving their conflicts. And of course, we also have many other systems that I will speak about specifically in other videos, because this is a huge topic. But one of the most important systems that we have for conflict resolution actually goes through play. And I think this is genius and something that could be adapted in society as a whole. So I will make a special video only for that. Number 8. Problems with the founder. I really think that having a visionary founder is one of the ingredients that really create success for intentional communities. And you can really see that the oldest and biggest communities in the world really have that ingredient. A founder that had a vision and that could really transmit that vision and be coherent to that vision, and also translate it practically and how to incorporate that vision in everyday life and in the community as a whole. But two problems might arise with a founder. And one is that if that founder aren't able to distribute the tasks among the community, and with time let go of that role of being in the foreground, of always being in the foreground of the community, because people really need to learn how to take the responsibility for the community that oftentimes is the task of the founder. Another problem is that when that founder dies, the community isn't able to renew themselves or isn't able to continue with this vision without this figure that was the founder who were coherent in that vision. Number 9, reputation management. And this is perhaps more relevant if your community grows and becomes bigger and has a bigger impact on its local environment. But it's an important one to mention anyways, because when your community grows and starts having an impact on the local environment, on the political environment, what might happen is that factors from the outside who are not in line with the vision of the community will try to attack the community and break it down. And I take this as an example because it's a personal example for me as well, because when I came to Damanhur, I started working with creating videos and with managing the social media of Damanhur, and I was very naive in the fact that, of course, everyone is interested in creating a better world and having more intentional communities that are created around the world that sustains the local environment, that are promoting a harmonious way to live together and to live with the nature. But I realized that that was, as I said, very naive. And I learned both from personal experience and from told experience from the past that Damanhur had been attacked various times and still are, with a lot of false media coverage, with police raids and other kind of things that for me was just like almost like living in a movie. And of course, all the coverage that I then read about Damanhur and that I read about the community that I was living in was not at all aligned with what I was living and experiencing every day. And still now I see that, for example, even on this YouTube channel, sometimes I get comments of people like, yeah, but I read this, how are you dealing with this? And so it's really important to understand that if you want to create a community, this might happen, and to be able to navigate that and to be able to not get torn down by that. So in Damanhur, we have had lawyers that have needed to really fight for some things that you might take for granted, but when you face big constitutions that are trying to tear your community down, then you really need to be able to protect yourself. And so, as I said, this might only be your case if your community grows a lot and becomes something that really has an impact on a local or global level. But I also think that this has to do perhaps in where you are in the world, because what I've seen is that some countries are more open to this kind of new initiatives while other countries are not. And I have really learned that Italy is a country where this kind of initiatives, intentional communities, eco-villages, and especially intentional communities that are speaking about spirituality in a way that is not in line with the church, they're really a target of getting the sect stamp. And that might have to do, of course, with a very strong institution that is based in this country, which is the Catholic Church. But anyways, this is important to be aware of, because this is something that is really a threat to tear your community down. We have arrived to the last one of this list, and this is really crucial, and that is failing to recruit new members or create a generational shift within the community. And this is something that I see a lot having to do with the eco-village movement, that communities and eco-villages that were born on this wave during the 70s and 60s, during the 60s and 70s, they are threatening extinction because they have not been able to recruit new members. And even though the people who were there to start the community or were there in the beginning of the community have survived up until now, their population is getting old. And so they really have difficulty of recruiting new members and the young generation. And I think that this is so important to establish even in the beginning, because even if you start out with a group of people who are like 25 years old, 30 years old, and you feel like you're in the top of the world, if you're not able to constantly recruit new members into your community, then your community will not last very long. And I think the reason why this is so difficult for many people in living in a community is that when you start something, oftentimes when you're creating an intentional community, you give up your whole life. You invest your whole life, your money, your energy, your time to really create this community. So the first years of creating a community, that is like your baby, like the seed that needs a constant input, that needs constant watering and constant attention, and able to actually become stable. And so of course it might be difficult when new members come in that has not contributed, or that has not contributed in that way that you have done in the beginning, and they're just, you know, rolling on the achievements that you have done, but they still need to have the same kind of rights and the same say in the decisions as you have. This is really difficult for people, and this is really where personal development is important, but also the higher vision is important, because if you have a higher vision of the community and a higher idea, then it's more important that the community will be able to sustain itself in the long run, even if you are not there. And so of course this requires a lot of humility of the other members and the previous members that arrived to the community, to be able to let newcomers into the community feel as part of the community as they have been, even if they feel that that is creating an internal conflict within them. That's really a spiritual work to do that I've seen in many different communities. It's so easy to tend to want to hold on to what you have created, to tend to want to hold on to a system that has been working even though it's outdated. And so what is really important is to be able to change and transform the community in order for it to serve the members, also the new members and new generations, instead of getting stuck in old ways of doing things. So we have arrived to the end of this video. Thank you for sticking along all the way to the end, and I really hope that this was valuable for you, that this gave you things to think about, and also practical ways of how you can start to structure a community if that is the path that you're on. And if you're interested in this kind of topics and find value from them, please remember to like and subscribe, and share it with anyone that you think could draw value from this. But also, do you have anything that you think could be added to the list? Please put it in the comments where we can start a discussion about this.